Hey guys, tonight we begin somewhere vast, quiet, and endlessly breathing. You're lying on your back wrapped in wool, and the smell of dry grass in the middle of a Mongolian steppe. The stars above look impossibly close. There's a chill in the wind, the kind that slips through blankets and wakes you before the sun. You hear it before you see it, the slow creak of saddle leather, the soft huff of a horse, and boots crunching frost. The vet is already up. Mongol horse doctors, you soon learn, don't believe in sleeping in. You shuffle out of your bedroll, your breath fogging in front of you. The horizon glows faintly orange, and the herds are beginning to stir. You pull on a heavy deal, an old faded robe fastened with a sash, and follow the horse doctor, who doesn't speak much, but nods for you to tag along. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake in this early part of the video, drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always fun to see where you're all tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're following him toward the herd where dozens of horses gather like ghosts in the dawn mist. You realize there's no barn, no fences, just tether ropes, thick necks, warm breath, and the constant shifting sound of hooves in frosted grass. The vet, he's somewhere in his 60s, maybe older, crouches down by a horse without hesitation. His first test of the day. Breathing. He watches how steam rises from the nostrils. You hear a low whistle escape his lips, and the horse responds by turning its head slightly. You blink confused. Was that communication? He puts a hand on the horse's belly. It's not just about warmth he's reading, texture, tightness, the way the muscles twitch beneath his palm. Mongol horse medicine, you quickly gather, is intimate. No clipboard, no machines. Just years of sensory memory passed down like songs. He motions you closer. Hesitant, you place your hand beside his. The belly is warm and firm, the flank quivers with each breath. Too dry, he mutters in Mongolian. No wind in the gut. You pause, hoping that was a metaphor. It's not. Wind in Mongol medicine is a diagnostic category. It's a force. A symptom, an energy, and if there's not enough or too much, it means something is off. You follow him as he moves through the herd, pausing here and there to sniff a flank, inspect a hoof, or run his fingers through a mane. His gestures are firm, but kind. The horses trust him. You can tell by how they barely flinch. As the sun lifts higher, the steppe becomes a sea of gold. In the distance, you see another rider, approaching another vet perhaps. They greet each other with a silent nod and begin discussing a mare with a swelling knee. You're invited to crouch beside them. They press gently around the joint, then stand. One of them pulls a strip of dried hide from his bag, chews it briefly, then rubs it onto the horse's skin. Chewed hide. You can't help but raise a brow. The vet chuckles and simply says, "Saliva helps bind the spirit." You decide not to question it. Mainstream historians often note how the Mongols were unparalleled riders and breeders. But what's less known, what gets buried in the dust of conquest tales, is how well they understood their horses' bodies. Mongol veterinary knowledge was holistic, built on daily observation, tactile feedback, and patterns of change that modern vets might miss for lack of data. One fringe idea you encounter is called breath path listening. The belief that placing an ear against a horse's side can reveal disruptions in not just breath, but harmony. It's part physical diagnosis, part spiritual attunement. There's even an old tale about a vet who claimed he could hear ghosts trying to possess a stallion's lungs. Whether that's true? Well, historians still argue whether such stories were poetic allegory or genuine belief. But there's no debate about one thing these vets caught issues early. Without tech, without books. Just wind, scent, balance, and sound. You watch the elder vet tie a red string to the forelock of a mare. It's a quiet ritual performed after declaring her protected. From what he doesn't say. But the red string flutters in the wind, and somehow, you believe it. By midday, the herd has moved to higher ground, and you share a quiet moment beside the vet seated on a rock. He hands you a skin of air-ag fermented mare's milk. Sharp, tangy, cold. You try not to grimace. He chuckles. Good for the stomach, he says. You nod, unsure if it's helping or hurting. As you sit, horses wander past like silent giants. The vet points to one with a strange gait. Old injury, he says. but it walks with dignity. You make a note of that line. Maybe it applies to people too. The sun warms the steppe. A breeze picks up. The day's only beginning. You wonder what else this vet knows, what else his fingers and nose and ears can sense that science has forgotten to look for. And so the journey continues. You trail behind him again. The horses are still grazing, and the wind has shifted. It carries a distinct scent now, damp earth, a hint of manure, and something sharper. The vet pauses mid-step. He lifts his chin slightly, nostrils flaring. That one, he murmurs. You follow his gaze. A chestnut gelding limps subtly, barely noticeable, unless you've been watching horses all your life. The vet doesn't rush. He walks wide around the animal, letting it see him approach before gently placing a hand on its withers. He leans forward and breathes in deeply. Yes, you're watching a man sniff a horse. What you're learning now is that Mongol horse doctors often diagnosed illness through scent changes in sweat breath and even dung. The steppe is quiet enough, pure enough that your nose can catch what a horse ate the day before, or if its stomach isn't digesting properly. He touches the horse's neck, sniffs near the ears, and then, most curiously, opens the horse's mouth with the help of a small carved stick. You wince slightly at the wet smacking noise. The vet doesn't flinch. He nods almost to himself. Sweet smell. Fever coming. You can't tell what he's referencing exactly, but you take his word for it. He reaches into his bag, pulls out a small cloth bundle, and unties it on a flat stone nearby. Inside are dried herbs, some gray-green, others powdery and pale. He adds water from his flask and lets the mixture steep in a horn cup. Smell it, he offers. You lean in. It's like old hay and mint, with a smoky bitterness underneath. Sweat tea, he says. Makes fever exit through skin. You watch him tip the warm liquid into the corner of the horse's mouth. The gelding doesn't fight it. Somewhere between science and sorcery, Mongol veterinary care lived in the nose. In fact, the historical record shows some horse healers called emch were trained specifically in olfactory diagnosis. One record from a Chinese envoy to the Mongol court recounts an emch identifying intestinal parasites in a horse by the scent of its breath alone. Modern vets might scoff, but oddly, a few equine researchers today are revisiting these scent-based practices, especially after studies showed that some diseases do indeed alter body odor. The Mongols may not have known about microbes, but they had a sense for imbalance that still holds merit. The vet is on the move again, this time toward the herd's southern edge where several mares stand by a shallow stream. One is breathing heavily. Not panicked, just labored. He doesn't touch her immediately. First, he watches her eyes, nostrils, and flanks. He crouches, scoops water, lets it trickle through his fingers, then smells her sweat again. Then he places both hands along her ribs and hums. Yes, hums. The sound is low, rhythmic, almost like a didgeridoo. You suppress a laugh. The vet side-eyes you knowingly. Sound calms blood, he says. Calm blood makes strong wind. There it is again, wind. You're beginning to understand that Mongol vets didn't think in terms of organs or germs. They thought in patterns of movement, hot, cold wind, damp. The horse's body was a weather system. If it stormed inside, something had to be done. Some fringe accounts suggest that certain families of horse doctors were trained to recognize over 200 scent variations. Others claimed to read breath for distance traveled diet change, or even emotional upset, like trauma from war or losing a foal. Historians still debate the legitimacy of these abilities. Some call it lore. Others think it's misunderstood sensory intelligence. Meanwhile, your vet begins preparing what he calls a steam cone. He takes a handful of herbs, wraps them in wool, soaks them in water, and places the bundle beneath the horse's chin where the warm sun heats it. The horse lowers its head as if grateful. He turns to you and says something short in Mongolian. You don't understand. He smiles and pats your chest. Smell with heart, he says. You don't know how, but that feels right. You break for lunch together. It's not a sandwich and chips kind of affair. He unwraps slices of dried meat, a chunk of cheese so sharp it could wound, and pours more air-ag. You eat in silence, save for the crunch of grass and occasional snort from a nearby stallion. By now, the day's rhythm has slowed. You're not checking your watch. There is no watch. There is only sun position wind shift, and the soft murmur of hooves. Later, you help the vet pack medicinal roots into a hollowed-out horn. He corks it with sheep wool and tucks it into his saddlebag. Another mare needs treatment this evening. Her breath smells of old dreams, he says. You raise an eyebrow again. He taps his head and smiles. Horses remember. Quirky, maybe. But when he leads that mare aside and rubs a salve made of goat-fat ash and pine on her temples, she leans into him with trust. You suddenly remember a study you read about trauma in animals, how elephants grieve, how dogs dream of their owners. And you wonder, maybe Mongol horse doctors knew what science is only now catching up to. As evening nears, the air thickens with cold again. The vet lights a small fire using dry dung and dried moss. Smoke rises in lazy curls, and you both sit silently watching the horses settle. The wind has shifted back, stronger now, sweeping across the plain. The vet stares into the distance. Too strong, he says. Tomorrow, joint pain will rise. You almost laugh, predicting inflammation based on wind. But then again, he's been right all day. You fall asleep to the smell of dung smoke, wind-swept grass, and fermented milk. A scent you'll never forget. Maybe in some small way you're starting to smell with your heart too. Morning breaks slowly across the steppe. You don't wake to an alarm clock, but to a rhythmic thudding hooves in motion pacing near your bedroll. When you sit up, the sky is an endless silver sheet, clouds brushing low across distant hills. The vet is already working. Again. You stretch your back protesting and follow the familiar figure hunched near a mare, his hands pressed lightly against her belly. Today he's focusing on the essentials: hooves, teeth, and belly sounds. You crouch nearby as he traces a crack in the mare's hoof with a sliver of polished horn, muttering something about dryness. He points to the edge of the hoof where it's worn unevenly. Too many rocks, too little wind. There's that word again, wind. You don't ask this time. You're starting to get it. Not scientifically, maybe, but intuitively. To the Mongols, wind means more than breeze. It's movement inside the body. Blood, breath, spirit. And horses are made of wind. Their hooves. That's where it escapes, if not balanced properly. He picks up the mare's foot, brings it to his ear, and taps it with his knuckle. You squint, waiting for a sound. He hears it immediately. Hollow, needs ash soak. You help him gather a mixture of fine sand-burned straw and river ash. He adds a touch of fermented milk and presses the paste into the hoof crack. You note the technique: dry matter to balance moisture, something like an ancient poultice. You also note the smell. Less pleasant. As he works, he talks. Horses speak with 4 things: eyes, sweat, breath, and belly. You're about to ask what he means by belly when he gestures for you to listen. He presses his ear to the horse's left side, eyes closed, and listens. You imitate him. At first, all you hear is wind outside, but then something subtle, a gurgling churn like soup over low heat. That's good, he whispers. Moving well. Then he moves to the other side. Silence. Too much silence. Blocked, he says. Cold in the gut. He pulls out a curved brass spoon and gently scrapes the mare's tongue. The residue, which he examines with all the reverence of a tea master, tells him something you can't see. Cold food, bitter grass. Bitter. Apparently, some grasses store cold energy at night and can imbalance the horse's belly. At least, that's the belief. You raise an eyebrow, but he waves off doubt. Try riding a horse that's full of cold. You won't survive a mile. That's not metaphor. You've heard the stories steppe riders thrown because their horse had a bellyache. In a land without fences, that kind of fall can be deadly. Next, he checks teeth. Using a carved bit of bone, he gently props the mare's mouth open and runs his fingers along the molars. Sharp edge here, he mutters, and shaves it gently with a rough stone. You wince at the sound, but the mare doesn't even blink. Horses in the Mongol Empire were everything. Transport heat food war machines. A vet who couldn't handle a tooth could cost a family its livelihood. Mainstream history reminds us that Genghis Khan's armies traveled with massive herds, sometimes 5 horses per rider. What's less known is how mobile vetting was an integral part of military success. You pictured a sick horse in battle meant the soldier lagged behind. A cracked hoof could delay a message days. Mongol horse doctors had to catch symptoms before they became visible, and that's where belly sounds and breath became critical tools. You ask him what happens when a horse's gut stops talking. He pauses, unusually serious. Then it's time to bring heat. From inside, he pulls out a narrow iron rod no longer than a handspan. Cauterize here, he says, pointing just behind the ribs. Small fire, not big. Just enough. You blink. Did he say fire? Yes. Mongol vets practiced light cauterization not cruelly, but carefully burning small patches to stimulate internal flow. The idea was to wake up wind, to jolt blocked energy into motion. Fringe, maybe. But modern acupuncture sometimes shares the same logic, and even now, some nomads still carry small branding sticks in their saddlebags. Historians argue about the practice. Was it effective, or just tradition? Some suggest it worked more as a placebo for the rider than cure for the horse. Others found journal records, Persian, Chinese, even Russian, of soldiers swearing it saved their mount's life. The truth still debated. By midday, you've checked 4 bellies, 5 sets of teeth, and cleaned more hooves than you care to count. But something has shifted in you. You're seeing horses less like pets, more like people with silent languages. Later, as the vet naps under a twisted larch tree, you sit beside a young colt watching its flanks rise and fall. You listen for belly sounds. One side gurgles, the other is faint. You try to remember, was faintness bad or balance? A breeze passes rustling the grass. The colt turns to look at you, ears flicking forward. And for a second, you're not just a guest here. You're listening with your body, sensing the horse like wind feels hills, patient, slow, steady. And somewhere deep in that quiet, you think you hear it breathe back. You wake to a change in the air. The wind has gone still. Not quiet, just hesitant, as if the sky is holding its breath. The horses know it too. They move, slower tails twitching with a different rhythm. The vet is kneeling beside a stallion near the fire pit, tossing dried leaves into a bowl of warm water. The steam rises fragrant and oddly sweet, curling in slow spirals. You draw closer and catch the scent pine dry moss and something musky underneath. Today, he says softly, we balance the weather inside. You blink. You hadn't realized the weather could live inside a horse. But Mongol medicine thinks in elements: wind, heat, cold, damp. The body isn't just a container, it's a climate. And that stallion. He's suffering from too much heat in the joints and not enough wind in the chest. So begins your introduction to the strange elemental worldview of steppe medicine. He dips a cloth in the steaming bowl and gently presses it to the stallion's shoulder. The horse exhales deeply. You can't help but notice how the warmth seems to calm both of them. As the cloth cools, he replaces it and begins to speak less to you, more like to the air. When the wind moves wrong, pain comes. When dampness stays, rot comes. When heat hides, strength weakens. It sounds like poetry, but his hands are steady as stone. He palpates the horse's legs, checking joints for heat, watching for swelling, always listening. You realize the vet sees horses not as mechanical bodies, but as landscapes prone to floods, droughts, windstorms. He explains that certain illnesses arrive with seasons. Spring brings soft hooves and belly cold. Summer brings lung heat. Autumn can stiffen joints. Winter makes everything brittle. Mainstream scholars have documented how Mongol healers aligned their diagnoses with nature's rhythms. Even a horse's shadow, its posture at dusk, or how it lay to rest, could indicate excess heat or trapped dampness. More fringe, though, were the sound therapies. Later that afternoon, a younger horse is brought over lame in the rear leg. The vet does something odd. He circles the animal slowly, then whistles. A clear, even tone. The horse flicks its ear. The vet whistles again, higher this time. The horse shifts slightly. You look around expecting an audience. But no, this is part of treatment. He explains that certain frequencies were believed to shake loose damp wind in the joints. You try not to laugh. It sounds ridiculous. Then again, ultrasound therapy exists now, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether Mongol sound treatments had merit, or were just ritual. Some say the whistling was more for calming the vet, not the horse. Others suggest that steppe cultures knew resonance mattered long before Western science proved it. You watch him pinch the horse's skin gently between thumb and knuckle, then release. He repeats this along the spine, muttering under his breath. No painkillers, no sedatives, just hands, steam, and sound. After the treatment, the horse is led off to walk in a circle. You both sit, watching it limp less than before. Not healed, but less stiff. The vet nods, satisfied. You eat dried apricots and mutton for dinner, washing it down with water that tastes faintly of charcoal. The vet chews slowly, staring into the fire. He tells you a story about a horse so sick with cold in the bones, it wouldn't move for 5 days. They tried every herb, every ointment. Nothing worked. Until one night, the vet simply lay beside the horse. Just lay there breathing with it matching rhythm. No treatment. Just presence. The next morning, the horse stood. You raise your brows skeptical. You think it healed because of you. He shrugs. Maybe. Or maybe it didn't want to die alone. You don't press. There's something about the firelight, the way it catches the edges of his weathered face, that makes silence feel truer than words. As the night deepens, he shows you another technique, warm pebbles placed under the armpit of a horse wrapped in cloth. Pulls out the cold, he says. You ask if they use needles like acupuncture. He shakes his head. Too sharp. Wind escapes. Then he pauses. But sometimes a thorn will do. You chuckle. It's hard to tell when he's serious. You begin to understand that Mongol veterinary care wasn't rigid. It was responsive, intuitive, and highly personal. No single rule. No one-size-fits-all. A treatment that worked for one horse might harm another. And so they adapted every day to every horse, like playing an instrument that's always slightly out of tune. As you crawl into your blanket under the stars, the wind finally returns, brushing the grass like a lullaby. You can still smell the herbs in your clothes, the steam from the cloth, and maybe, if you're not imagining it, a faint whistle drifting through the dark. You wake before dawn again, not because someone shakes you, not because of a rooster crowing or a watch alarm chirping, but because the wind, now bold and fast, tugs at your blanket like a child in a hurry. It whistles past your ear, sending dried grass flittering over your boots. The horses are already restless, noses high manes, rippling like streamers in the breeze. You know by now this wind means something. The vet's already up, already muttering. Too much wind. It's in the shoulder and the blood, he says, frowning as he watches a gray mare shifting uneasily. Need to settle it, not push it out, settle. You squint at him. Isn't wind just wind? But today you're learning a different kind of diagnosis, a philosophy, almost. One, not of infection or injury, but of imbalance. Mongol horse doctors treated the body as a field of forces wind heat, damp and cold. It wasn't just metaphor, it was medicine. You follow him to a shaded spot where he lays out 4 smooth stones. Each represents one of the elements. He places them in a square, sets a small pot of herbs in the center, and begins burning something that smells like cedar bark and strangely goat fur. He kneels beside the mare and speaks softly, not to you, not to himself, but to the horse. Your heat is running, he says, placing a hand on the shoulder. Your wind has turned in. You want to laugh. But then he grabs a dried pelt, dips it in warmed water, and begins pressing it along the mare's spine in a slow, rhythmic motion. Each press is accompanied by a quiet hum. You feel that he asks. You nod, though you're not sure what you're feeling, just warmth, weight, presence. But the mare. She lowers her head. Her ears stop flicking. Her breath evens. You notice he's focusing on joints, shoulders, knees, hips. These are wind points, he explains. Places where movement is supposed to flow freely. When blocked, they seize. When excessive, they burn. It's not pain Mongol vets look for, it's motion or the lack of it. He ties a strip of red cloth around the mare's leg near the knee, to trap the wind so it doesn't run wild. Another mare is brought over, this one shivering even in the warm air. He places his hand over her chest and closes his eyes. Then he grabs a soft leather pouch from his bag and produces 3 small silver rings. He explains these are cooling metals. They pull out the fire. He slips one onto the mare's ear just at the base. The others go on her bridle. You think it's just a charm, until you see the mare's breathing settle. Modern scholars have sometimes dismissed these practices as superstition, but more recently, veterinary researchers in Central Asia are finding that materials like silver and copper may indeed have microbe-resistant properties. Were the Mongols intuitively correct, or just lucky? Historians still argue. Some say it's proof of observational genius, others say placebo. Yet in remote areas today, herders still use these methods sometimes because they work when nothing else does. After the rings, he applies what looks like mud to the horse's chest. Not mud, he corrects, sensing your thought. Volcanic dust, from far west. Keeps damp from crawling in. You think again of how Mongols mapped their world not in roads, but in forces. Weather wasn't something above, it was inside. and the horse's body was a reflection of the land itself. Cracked hooves in a dry season, joint aches before a storm. It's all the same system. The afternoon is dedicated to warm therapy. You gather smooth stones, heat them in the coals, then wrap them in thick cloth. These are pressed behind the ears along the spine and beneath the belly. Don't burn, the vet warns. Heat must be gentle, like a whisper. By the fourth horse, your hands are learning the pressure, the pace. You're listening not with ears, but with fingers. Later, the vet shows you a pouch of blackened roots, dried, twisted things that smell like wet wood. These are ground mixed with oil and applied to the tail base when wind has fled the back. One mare refuses to stand after eating snowmelt grass. Too much cold inside, the vet says. He lights a small fire near her hind legs, not on her, just nearby, to draw the cold outward. Then he places his hands on her belly and hums again. You try not to question the humming. By now, it's like background music to the day. Toward dusk, he tells you of a particular type of wind. The stiffening wind that doesn't make noise but leaves horses frozen with tremors. Mongol lore suggests it rides into the body unnoticed, nesting in joints, causing a slow, irreversible tightening. Modern vets might call it arthritis. Mongol vets. They treat it with heat motion, even poetry. One tale speaks of a vet who recited the same 6-line poem while massaging a horse's leg every evening for a month until the horse danced again. Does it work? Well, historians still debate whether the poetry healed the horse or simply restored its rhythm. You lie back near the fire that night, bones sore, fingers fragrant with oils and herbs. The vet passes you a cup of something smoky and warm. For balance, he says, "You've taken too much wind today. You sip. It tastes like licorice and dirt. Not terrible." And as the moon rises over the hills, casting pale light on the grazing herd, you think back to that idea that maybe illness isn't an enemy to fight. Maybe it's just weather out of place. This morning begins not with the rustle of blankets or the call of birds, but with the sharp hiss of heat. You sit up to find the vet crouched by the fire, holding a thin metal rod over glowing coals. He's heating it to a dull red, and that alone is enough to jolt you fully awake. "Time for burning," he says matter-of-factly, as though you're off to pluck weeds or fill a water trough. You swallow hard. But this isn't cruelty. Not here. Not in this world where fire is medicine and pain is a message. Today you're learning about the more intense interventions cauterizing pinching and whistling. He lifts the rod carefully and walks over to a stallion with a swelling in its hindquarter. You follow, clutching your blanket like it might protect you. The stallion doesn't shy away. He stands still, eyes calm. He trusts this man. The vet squats beside the swelling places. A hand there for a long moment, then presses the metal gently to a spot just behind the bulge, away from the injury, but close enough to stir something beneath the skin. The horse flinches, but only once, then settles. You stare. "That's it," you whisper. The vet shrugs. "Only a small fire, just enough to wake the blood." He explains in Mongol horse medicine, cauterization isn't for burning away infection. It's a jolt. A reminder to the body that something has stopped flowing. The technique isn't unique to Mongols. Ancient Egyptians, Persians, and even 17th century French cavalry vets used cautery. But here on the steppe, it's done with reverence, quietly, sparingly, like whispering into the nervous system. Afterward, he coats the spot with a thick, tallow-based salve. It smells like scorched wool and pine ash. "Wound needs warmth, not exposure," he murmurs. You wonder, how did he know exactly where to burn? He gestures for you to try. You press your fingers into the horse's skin. Then he guides your hand an inch to the left. There, under your touch, is a spot just slightly colder, slightly tighter. You hadn't noticed it before, but now you do. Next comes pinching. You watch as he kneels beside a mare with stiffness in her back legs. Instead of rubbing or heating, he pinches the skin along the spine. Rhythmic, careful pinches with the edge of his thumb and the flat of his nail. Each one leaves a faint red mark. This, he says, makes the wind climb, brings it back to the chest. You blink. He's drawing energy upward. In fringe accounts recorded by Qing dynasty travelers, Mongol healers described this upward movement as the body's attempt to reset the breeze. Like tapping a wind chime out of tune until it rights itself. Pinching is done in specific patterns, 7 points, then rest. 9, then repeat. always in odd numbers. You ask why. He grins, taps his chest, and says, "Even numbers are for graves." Noted. Next, he pulls a thin bone whistle from his pouch. Decorated with faded carvings and wrapped in twine, it looks ancient. He blows it softly. The sound is high bird-like and strangely lonely. He walks a circle around the mare, whistling every few steps. You feel silly watching. But then the mare lowers her head, her breathing slowing. You think it's nothing he says, but the sound shakes loose the wind. He gives you the whistle. You try it. The note you produce is not beautiful. A wheezing squawk. But you try again and again. On the 5th try, the vet nods, satisfied. Some mainstream historians believe Mongol whistling had less to do with sound therapy and more with marking time. That each note corresponded to a pressure point or step in a massage sequence. Others think it had spiritual roots, calling ancestral winds to carry away illness. The vet, he says simply. It helps the horse remember calm, and honestly, you can't argue with that. That afternoon, you assist with another case of filly who refuses to eat. No swelling, no visible pain. Just listless eyes and a stiff neck. The vet burns sage and crushes fermented garlic into a ball of wool. He holds it under her nose, murmurs something you don't catch, then pinches the base of her ear. She forgot her name, he says. Now we remind her. You look at him sideways. Her name. He nods. Every horse has one inside. Not a word, just a feeling. When illness comes, they forget it. We help them find it again. Is that science not in any journal article? But by sunset, the filly is chewing again. You sit beside the vet, feeling the smoke cling to your clothes, the faint sting of herbal oil in your nose. You think about all the things that seem bizarre at first, pinching, burning, whistling, and how somehow they work. You ask him if he's ever had a horse he couldn't help. He nods. Many. What did you do? He looks to the horizon. Sang them home. You fall asleep that night to the sound of distant whistling carried by the same wind that just this morning was thought to be running wild through a stallion's leg. Maybe it was. Maybe it still is. The morning begins unusually quiet. Not because the horses are still, they aren't. They shuffle, stamp, and breathe the same as always. But something about the air is different. Heavier, maybe, or expectant. You follow the vet as he carries a bundle wrapped in faded silk. Not herbs, not tools, something older. He leads you away from camp past the edge of the herd toward a thicket of birch trees. There, tied to one of the branches, is a string of small bones, bird bones, strung together like wind chimes. They clatter softly as if greeting him. Today, you're learning something you didn't expect, how Mongol horse doctors worked with dung bones and sacred charms. The bundle is placed carefully on a flat stone. He unties it. Inside are slivers of rib bone, tiny jaw fragments, and what looks like a small leather pouch filled with powdered ash. It's not a shaman's altar. It's a doctor's cabinet, just not one you'd find in a clinic. The patient is a young gelding with a cough that won't go away. No fever, no wheezing, just a dry, persistent hack that's been getting worse. The vet doesn't start with medicine. He starts with observation. He circles the horse slowly like he's reading the wind. Then he kneels, and yes, smells the horse's breath. Smoky, he says, too much old air. You're not sure what that means, but the vet seems certain. He points to the ground. Dung, he says. You blink, sorry. He gestures again. I need his dung. You fetch it slightly horrified. He crumbles a small handful between gloved fingers and examines the texture. The smell. Even the steam rising from it. Too dry, he mutters. No wind passed through the gut. It's moments like this that remind you Mongol horse medicine wasn't just unconventional, it was unapologetically earthy. Dung was diagnostic. Its shape, weight, moisture, and scent all told a story about what was happening inside the horse. And if the horse's body was a landscape, dung was the weather report. Fringe records from Persian scribes who traveled with Mongol caravans described how some horse doctors could diagnose digestive imbalance or even respiratory illness based on the color of a single dropping. Sounds impossible. And yet here you are. The vet sprinkles a bit of ash from the pouch onto the horse's tongue. Burnt bone, he explains. From ancestor's horse. Gives strength. Wait, what? He tells you the powder is made from the cremated bones of a famous war horse ground during a lunar eclipse and stored for years. Whether that's tradition or theater, you're not sure. But it certainly feels sacred. He rubs some of it onto the horse's flanks, then ties a charm to the bridle, 2 jawbones crossed and painted with red ochre. "What's that for, you ask?" To confuse the bad wind, he says simply, "You don't laugh. Not now." The horse stands still, almost reverent. Mainstream historians often skip these details, too strange, too superstitious. But anthropologists who've studied Central Asian medicine confirm that charms bones and ritual objects were not extra in the healing process. They were essential. Physical and spiritual health weren't separate. They were braided together like horsehair. Later in the day, the vet pulls out something new, a thin flute carved from a deer's femur. He plays it while pacing the perimeter of the herd. The sound is hollow and high like wind over a cracked reed. You expect the horses to spook, but instead they gather. He tells you this ritual is for settling the herd's spirit, especially before storms. Horses are communal, he says. One sick wind can pass from body to body, if not checked. He makes a small fire and adds dried dung and cedar bark. The smoke is thick, and you're told to walk the coughing gelding through it slowly, 3 times clockwise. This isn't science. It's belief woven with behavior. But you're starting to see the wisdom underneath. The horse walks easier. Not cured, but changed. That evening, you help him bury a charm near a watering hole. It's a tiny horse figurine made from compacted grass and blood. From last winter's strongest, he explains. You realize now healing isn't only about fixing what's broken. It's about reminding the body what it means to be whole. And sometimes a horse needs a symbol to remember. Historians still debate the role of these rituals. Were they really part of veterinary knowledge? Or were they spiritual maintenance disguised as medicine? One theory is that Mongol horse doctors had to be everything. Vet, priest, counselor, meteorologist. The steppe didn't allow for specialists. You fall asleep that night beside the fire, one of the bone charms hanging on a stick above your head. Just in case. You've begun to understand that what we call superstition may just be science that hasn't learned to see yet. The sun doesn't rise so much as creep over the edge of the world this morning, spilling gold across the frost-tipped grass. You wake to a soft thudding, not hoofbeats this time, but something gentler. A tongue. Specifically, a horse's tongue, gently flopping out of its mouth as the vet inspects it with the scrutiny of a jeweler studying a precious gem. Today's lesson, horse tongues and family secrets. You shuffle over, rubbing sleep from your eyes, just in time to see the vet lean in, close eyes narrowed. He taps the side of the tongue with his index finger, then tilts the horse's head to catch the light. "Purple," he mutters. "Wind blockage, probably the liver." You blink. You can tell that from the tongue. He nods. Tongue shows the path of the blood. He gestures for you to come closer. Look. So you look. It's not just color, though. The shade is strange, a deep pinkish violet. He points out small ridges near the sides like tiny mountains. Then the faint white coating near the center. The tip, he says, is too dry. Each sign is a clue. A whisper from the body. And the vet, he's spent decades learning to listen. Mongol horse doctors saw the tongue as a mirror, not just of digestion, but of flow. If the blood was sluggish or too hot or blocked somewhere deep inside the tongue, betrayed the truth. And the horses couldn't fake it. Interestingly, modern veterinary science does sometimes use tongue color as a symptom, though not to the same mystical degree. Pale anemia, blue respiratory issue, swollen, maybe an allergic reaction. But this is a symphony of signals interpreted through generations of knowledge. Her mother had the same mark the vet adds, suddenly pointing to a dark line down the center of the tongue. You stare. You remember the mother's tongue. He grins. I treated her 10 winters. Same stiffness in the back legs. Same breath. You realize now you're not just with a horse doctor. You're with a family doctor. Except his family is 4-legged and goes back generations. He tells you a story while gently massaging the horse's jaw of a foal born during a thunderstorm, so frightened it refused to eat for 3 days. The mare, its mother, had nearly trampled him trying to find it. And now this filly, the foal's grandchild, is showing the same anxious teeth grinding at night. Some fears, he says, live in blood. You're quiet. That's not science. But it feels true. You help him prepare a tongue balm made of pine resin, dried mare's milk, and a drop of honey. It's not to be eaten, just massaged in. Sweetness calms the mouth, he says. Calm mouth, calm stomach. And then he tells you something you weren't expecting. Tongue diagnosis isn't only about color or moisture. It's also about shape. A tongue too long might mean stubbornness. One that trembles. Nerves. Curled edges. A sign of trapped wind. There are even whisperings among elder vets, he says, of tongues revealing destiny. One legend claims that a stallion with a cross-shaped crease at the tip is bound to die in battle. You raise an eyebrow. He just shrugs. Doesn't mean we stop trying. You spend the afternoon examining tongues horses of different sizes, ages, temperaments. Some are still and cooperative. Others nip. One mare tries to lick your face, which the vet finds hilarious. Through it all, you realize how personal this practice is. You can't just glance at a tongue and declare a diagnosis. You have to know the horse, its bloodline, its history, its mood, its bad habits. That's why he calls it family knowledge. One fringe practice he shares, used by only the most traditional families, is the whisper test. The vet places his face close to the horse's muzzle and whispers the same phrase 3 times. If the tongue retreats at the 3rd word, it's a sign the horse's inner fire is restless. If it stays relaxed, all is well. You try it. You whisper, feeling half ridiculous. The horse stares at you. Then slowly, lazily, it sticks out its tongue. The vet grins. She likes you. There are records, surprisingly, that back this up. Chinese and Tibetan veterinary manuscripts often referenced the tongue as an organ of both digestion and emotion. Some even suggested that certain sounds or tones could stimulate healing. Were they right? Historians still argue. But modern acupuncture does consider tongue mapping as part of diagnosis. As the sun lowers, the vet sits beside you, polishing the bone handle of a tongue hook passed down from his grandfather. The tool is worn smooth from decades of use. He said every horse tongue holds 2 secrets, the vet says. One about its body, one about its rider. You glance at your reflection in a bucket of water. You haven't touched a mirror in days. You wonder what would your tongue say about you. That night, as you fall asleep beneath a blanket of stars, you picture the vet quietly checking tongues by moonlight one by one in a line of shadows. Each flicker of pink telling a story only he understands, and somehow that's comforting. The wind is sharp today. Not loud, just cold and direct like it has somewhere to be. You rise slowly, arms stiff from the chill, and find the vet kneeling beside his horse, unpacking his saddlebag with a care usually reserved for religious ritual. Today, you finally get a look inside the doctor's saddlebag. You expect herbs, maybe a blade or 2, but what you find is far stranger and somehow more intimate. First, a pouch of salt-crusted wool. Not for wounds, but for scent diagnosis. The wool is rubbed behind the ears of a sweating horse to capture its unique smell. The vet sniffs it later like a perfumer judging purity. He hands you the pouch to try. You nearly gag. It smells like sour milk iron, and something else you can't name. The vet grins. That's a worried horse, he says. Not sick, just thinking too much. You're not sure whether to laugh or be impressed. Next is a coiled twine rope stained from use. Not for tying legs or leading animals, but for testing tension. He wraps it around the base of the horse's tail, gently pulls, then watches the reaction. Tight tail means tight gut, he mutters. If they fight the rope, the pain's deep. You ask how he knows when to stop pulling. He taps the skin just under his own ribs. Same here, he says. When you feel it, you stop. The next item is stranger. A jar of goat bile suspended in thick oil. It smells like bitterness and old smoke. He dips a tiny spoon into it and smears a bit on the gums of a coughing colt. For stubborn lungs, he explains. Not for the body, for the bile to scare the cough away. You stare. That sounds like a dare, not a treatment. But the colt doesn't flinch. In fact, it seems calmer afterward. You ask him if the bile has medicinal properties. Maybe he shrugs. But mostly the horse hates it so much it forgets the cough. He's not entirely joking. Then comes a curved bone hook, worn, smooth, shaped like a question mark. It's used for pulling the tongue forward during diagnosis. He hands it to you. It feels heavier than it looks. Made from femur of a steppe deer, he says. Old deer, smart one. You don't ask how he knows that. There's also a folded silk square, not decorative. It's used to shield the eyes of nervous horses during treatment. The vet places it gently across the mare's face as he checks her hooves, whispering a lullaby as he works. Darkness calms memory, he says. Too much sky makes fear grow. You've never thought about the sky being too much, but out here where it stretches forever, maybe it is. From a hidden side pocket, he draws a small wooden disc etched with simple lines, an ancestral wind compass. It doesn't point north. It tracks prevailing winds by feel-guiding treatment for certain seasonal illnesses. Today, the wind comes from the snake's tail, he says, running his finger along the groove. Bad for joints. You wonder if this is superstition, then remember your aching knees. And finally, his most precious item, a braided lock of horsehair wrapped in hide. It belonged to his first horse, he tells you. The one that carried him through 6 winters, and the death of his father. I show this to sick horses sometimes, he says. Let them know what strength looks like. You fall silent. This bag isn't just a kit. It's a biography written in rope bone bile and memory. Every object has a purpose, and every purpose a story. Some of the tools are practical, some symbolic, some maybe a bit of both, but none are random. Mainstream historians often catalog tools of war, not tools of care, but documents from the 14th century mention pouches of healing carried beneath the saddle. What was in them, no one wrote that down, and wrote that. Scholars debate whether Mongol horse doctors had standard kits. Some say yes, organized and taught through apprenticeship. Others argue that each vet built his kit from what worked best for him. This vet, his bag, is half science, half inheritance. That evening you ask if he ever replaces anything. Only when it breaks on its own, he replies. You reach into the bag and feel the texture of hardened leather, the softness of wool, the cold curve of horn. Each object seems to hold temperature, memory, intent. Later, as you sit under a blanket, the wind howling like a distant river, the vet places the silk square gently over your eyes. Darkness calms memory, he says again. And it does. You fall asleep with the saddlebag beside you, dreaming of bone hooks, goat bile, and the quiet weight of a wooden disc that spins only for those who can feel the wind with their heart. The morning feels stiller than usual. Not calm, just hushed. The kind of stillness that stretches over a space where something once was. You notice the vet isn't by the fire. The horses are grazing quietly, but there's a sense of absence. Then you see him kneeling beside a mare, lying down, not resting, but unmoving. She's gone. Today, you bear witness to a side of Mongol horse medicine rarely spoken of in books or scrolls when a horse becomes a ghost. You approach slowly. The vet doesn't look up, but you see his hand gently brushing along her neck the way someone might sweep dust off a photograph. She waited for the stars, he says softly. The sun hasn't fully risen, but the light is beginning to touch her flank. She's still warm. No panic, no rushing, just grief folded into routine. He gathers his tools not for treatment this time, but for farewell. There's no burial pit, no headstone. Mongols rarely buried their horses. Instead, they performed small rites releases. He begins by braiding a small portion of her mane, knotting it 3 times. So the wind won't steal her name, he says. Then he presses his forehead to hers, murmuring something in a tone too low to catch. A prayer. A memory. Maybe both. Next comes the ritual of smoke. He builds a small fire of dried dung and wormwood, placing it near her hind legs. As it burns, he waves the smoke gently over her body, using a strip of birch bark. Smoke lifts her spirit, he explains, carries it upward before it sinks into the earth. You watch in silence, unsure whether to feel sadness or awe. The vet doesn't cry, but there's an ache in the way his shoulders slope. Then comes something stranger. He unrolls a strip of blue silk and places it over the horse's eyes. You expect this to be a symbol of rest, but he says otherwise. She must not see the herd leaving. You don't ask why. Some things are explained only in tone. Finally, he opens his saddlebag and removes a small figurine, a horse carved from antler, no longer than a finger. He places it beneath the mare's tongue. For the next road, he says. Mainstream historians often overlook Mongol animal funerary customs, assuming livestock were disposable. But travelers from the Yuan dynasty recorded ceremonies just like this, especially for war horses or those born during storms. These were not just animals. They were companions, ancestors, omens. Later that morning, he leads the rest of the herd away from the site slowly, with a rhythm that feels ceremonial. The horses don't resist. They don't neigh or buck. They know. You walk beside him, the silence between you now shared. Death isn't sickness, he finally says. It's just when the wind decides to stop. You pass a hill where bones are scattered sun-bleached clean. a former horse long gone. The vet stops, kneels, and places a single stone on the largest piece a shoulder blade. To mark her return, he says. You ask him how many he's lost. Enough to remember, he replies. Not enough to forget. He tells you how the spirits of good horses linger for a time, especially near the herds they loved. You must speak softly around them, avoid anger, and never whistle at night. Whistling calls the wind, and if it carries the wrong ghost, sickness follows. You ask if he believes that. I believe in memory, he says, and memory has weight. That afternoon, he makes spirit tea, a blend of dried mint birch bark and a touch of fermented mare's milk. He pours it into a cracked wooden cup and lets the steam rise, waving it toward the four corners of the camp. You're handed the last sip. You drink. It's bittersweet and oddly warm down the spine. Before night falls, he returns to the site, removes the blue cloth from her face, and tucks it into a stone crevice nearby. So she can sleep with the wind. You don't dream that night. Or if you do, it's only of hooves, gentle ones, moving through the grass, never quite touching the ground. The mood shifts by morning. The grief of yesterday hasn't vanished. It's simply folded itself into routine, tucked between saddle straps and hoof checks. The herd must move, and so must the vet. But today he walks with a new stiffness in his gait. Not sorrow, formality. You recognize it immediately. You're entering the realm of the powerful. Today's path leads toward a large camp unlike any you've seen so far. Rows of ornate gurz yurts rise against the wind flags fluttering with golden emblems. Guards patrol, horses gleam with polished tack. At the center is a tent larger than any home you've known. This is the court of the Khan, and you're about to witness how the Emperor's healers worked. You pass beneath the painted arch, your presence ignored by all but the horses, dozens of them. Sleek, powerful, bred for war. Each one accompanied by its own handler. Here, horse medicine is both sacred and strategic. The vet doesn't speak much. He's greeted with subtle nods, a flick of the eyes. Even in the Emperor's camp, he is known. Respected. You're ushered to the side of a pale stallion draped in crimson silk. A courtier gestures this horse belongs to a general. It has been listless, refusing to eat its coat dulled. The vet kneels beside it without hesitation. But today he doesn't touch immediately. First he waits. He stands still beside the stallion for several minutes, watching its breath. The ripple of skin, the occasional blink. A long silence. Then only then does he reach for its nose. Too many eyes have touched him, he says. We must take them off. You frown. What? He pulls from his bag a scrap of black felt and covers the horse's face. Horses feel envy, he explains, especially powerful ones. It sounds absurd. But then again, you remember how even the gentlest horse back at camp tensed when others watched too long. This is your first glimpse into political veterinary care, where healing must consider status. A general's horse cannot simply be treated. It must be honored, appeased, and shielded from court tension, literal and symbolic. The vet lights a small cone of dried herbs, fanning the smoke beneath the horse's belly. To distract bad wind, he whispers. You begin to see the deeper complexity. Mongol healers weren't just animal doctors. They were advisors, interpreters, sometimes even oracles. You're led to a second patient, this one. A war horse, high-strung and lean with a reputation for charging into arrows. It refuses to stand still. The handler scowls. The vet doesn't scold. Instead, he begins chanting a soft, droning hum that builds like the roll of distant thunder. He walks slowly in a circle around the animal, never raising his voice. After a minute, the horse stills. You're stunned. Battle horses hear ghosts, he says. We must hum louder than the dead. Mainstream records from Yuan dynasty officials describe such rituals. In fact, they often mistook horse doctors for shamans, and sometimes they were right. At the Emperor's level, horse medicine became statecraft. Healers tracked the health of the Khan's herd as a reflection of empire-wide energy. A sick horse, bad omen. A limping war steed, a warning about the loyalty of its rider. You're shown scrolls, long pieces of hide with crude diagrams of horse silhouettes marked with symbols at joints. Pressure points, even veins. These are early medical charts, you're told. But some symbols aren't medical, they're astrological. One of the court astrologers joins the conversation. He explains how horse health is affected by planetary alignment. Mars rising in the east. Expect hoof rot. Venus descending. Watch for breath illness. The vet doesn't dismiss this. In fact, he seems to consider it. Stars breathe, he says. So do we. It's hard to argue. That evening, you sit with the court healer team as they grind lapis lazuli into powder and mix it with resin, creating a salve for a cracked hoof. You ask if this actually works. Yes, one replies. And also it pleases the Khan. Dual-purpose medicine heal the animal, flatter the emperor. You ask what happens when a horse dies in court. A hush falls. One healer whispers it is not allowed. You think he's joking. He's not. If a court horse dies, a separate set of healers conducts a ritual of silence. No bells, no mourning sounds, no visible burial. The horse is unmade, not grieved. A measure to avoid panic loss of face or worse prophecy. You leave camp late head low. The vet says little, but his grip on the reins is firmer. Too many people watching, he mutters. Not enough listening. As you return to your familiar camp, the stars are rising. And in their quiet shimmer, you realize the horse doctors of the Empire didn't just treat legs and lungs. They held the pulse of a nation, one heartbeat, one hoofbeat at a time. The next morning breaks not with firelight or hoofbeats, but a strange silence that clings to your skin like fog. Even the vet's steps seem slower today. He pauses at the edge of camp, eyes scanning the herd with an intensity that feels heavier. You soon learn why. He gestures toward a small cluster of mares at the river bend. One is lying down not in death, but in distress, breathing hard. Her eyes are glazed. Her flanks pulse like bellows working too fast. She's not sick, he says quietly. The world is. Today, you're learning one of the most unsettling concepts in Mongol horse medicine, when a sick horse means a sick herd, and a sick herd might mean the world is out of harmony. This isn't about one animal. It's about balance within the herd, within the land, even the sky. Mongol vets weren't just treating individuals. They were reading signs like ripples from a single stone disturbing the surface of a great wide lake. You walk with him toward the mare. She pants as though heat is trapped inside her body, but the air is cold. The ground is soft. Nothing external explains this collapse. He crouches beside her and places a stone smooth round just under her chest. Then he steps back and waits. You ask why. If she rolls off the stone, the heat is moving, he says. If not, it's stuck. And it's not just hers. She doesn't move. He exhales slowly. Then it's the herd. He begins checking others. Not for lameness or bruising, but for rhythm. Are they breathing evenly? Are their tails twitching too fast? Are they eating slower than usual? And suddenly a pattern forms. They're all a little off. The wind in their lungs is rising, he says. You frown. A cold wind. No, he says. A nervous wind. Not weather something bigger. He gathers herbs not for application, but to burn. Wormwood, pine resin, dried millet husks. As the smoke curls, he walks a wide circle around the herd, dragging his fingers through the air as if measuring invisible threads. This isn't disease, he explains. It's misalignment. The herd feels something we don't yet. You glance at the hills. Nothing seems out of place. But you notice the birds are flying lower. And the sky, now that you look, has an odd hue, greenish along the horizon. A storm, maybe. He tells you of a time years ago when a herd began coughing days before a drought. Not one horse, all of them. Mongol horse doctors believe such signs aren't coincidence. Horses are more sensitive than people. They feel shifts in the world before humans understand them. Some call this superstition. But you've been here long enough to wonder. The mare finally rolls slightly barely. The stone shifts. The vet watches. Now we know where to begin, he says. He leads you to the edge of camp and instructs you to gather wind markers branches bent in a V-shaped stones with holes feathers. Each is placed along the path the herd walks during grazing. They catch the sick wind, he explains, so it doesn't spread. He dips cloth strips in horse sweat and hangs them on tree limbs. You raise an eyebrow. Why sweat? He nods. It carries the herd's truth. If the air reads it, maybe it'll answer. This is beyond medicine now. It's almost like diplomacy with nature itself. Mainstream historians often ignore this side of veterinary practice, but Mongol texts and oral traditions describe herds as barometers of spiritual harmony. A restless horse a warning, a silent one, even worse. He prepares a herd salve, not for injury, but for scent. A mixture of ash salt and goat's milk rubbed lightly onto the foreheads of the lead horses. To remind them of the ground beneath them, he says. You ask if this actually works. It reminds them, he repeats. Reminding is half of healing. As evening falls, the air tightens. Wind begins to pick up, not strong, but insistent. A storm, yes, but more than that, it feels sentient. The vet instructs everyone to sleep near their horses tonight. They carry fear in their spines, he says. Let yours rest against theirs. You lie with your back pressed to a gelding's ribs, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. He sighs low and long, and your own chest softens in response. And somewhere in the dark, the idea of individual illness starts to feel small. Here, everything is connected, horse-herd, human hill. Healing one means listening to all. Just before you drift off, the vet passes by and says softly, "Tomorrow we treat the soil." You want to ask what that means, but sleep pulls you under before you can. The storm doesn't arrive with thunder or rain. It arrives with silence. You wake in a world muffled, no wind, no birds, no chatter from the horses. Even the grass seems still bent in reverence. You find the vet already moving through camp, with quiet urgency checking fetlocks, listening to hooves, sniffing the air with the caution of a hunter. Today's lesson is more than medicine. It's superstition, vigilance, fear laced with ritual, wolves' omens and the night watch. The vet doesn't say much at first. He tightens his belt, checks the straps on his saddle, and slips something small into his pocket, a dried wolf's tooth on a string. Tonight, he says, the herd will speak. You ask what he means. Some winds walk on 4 legs, he replies. Some omens have claws. It sounds like poetry, but the tension in his jaw says otherwise. You spend the morning reinforcing the camp's perimeter. Not with fences, you won't find many of those on the steppe, but with signal charms, bones strung on wire, thin strips of cloth dyed red, and lines of ash sprinkled like breadcrumbs between tufts of grass. You help hang the bones. They clack together gently in the breeze, not loud enough to scare predators, but just enough to announce presence. The sound keeps out the wrong dreams, he says. The day passes without incident. But the horses are restless. They bunch closer together. They snort more often. Even the colts, usually playful, stand tense ears twitching at noises you can't hear. By dusk, the vet begins preparing something unusual. He lights a small fire, not for warmth, but for smoke mapping. He places it in the center of the herd and watches how the smoke curls. If the smoke goes west, spirits are calm. East, there's trouble. You watch. It goes north. The vet curses under his breath. He pulls out a salt bell, a small leather pouch filled with coarse salt and dried bone powder. It rattles softly when shaken. He ties it to the tail of the lead horse. Wolves hate bells, he mutters, and spirits don't like being counted. You don't ask what that last part means. The other herders join in silence. They all seem to know what's coming, or at least what might be. You're assigned to the night watch. Your shift is second from midnight to moonset. As darkness falls, the world tightens. The only sound is hooves shifting and the dry rustle of wind over empty plains. You sit beside the vet who tells you about dream sickness, a phenomenon when a horse experiences nightmares so vivid, it wakes up wild-eyed and ill. One stallion, he says, once tore its own tether trying to escape something no one could see. Night is when the herd remembers, he says, and sometimes they remember too much. He pulls out a bottle of mare's milk, mixes it with crushed fennel, and paints a line down the nose of each horse. For forgetting, he explains. As your shift begins, you walk the camp's perimeter. The sky is dark velvet stars sharp enough to cut, and then far off you hear it. A howl, not close, but not far enough. The horses shift. You hear one snort and stomp. The bell on the lead horse rattles once, then stops. You keep walking. Another howl, then silence, then a shadow. Not human. Low, moving fast. You step backward. The vet appears beside you as if summoned by thought alone. He whistles a high, slicing note that doesn't echo but seems to press outward into the dark. The horses settle. You exhale. Just checking, he says, not breaking stride. You return to the fire, where he drops a handful of herbs into the flames. The scent is sharp juniper garlic skin sour milk. To hide our smell, he mutters. It's a ritual of confusion meant to tangle a predator's sense of scent and direction. Whether it works or not, no one questions it. Later, in the deep part of night, he tells you of a superstition passed from his grandfather. When wolves circle but do not attack, it means something else wants in. You shiver not from cold. Dreams, you ask. He nods. The horses begin to twitch in their sleep. A few whinny, short-clipped sounds. One colt stands abruptly, looking nowhere ears flat. The vet doesn't move. He just watches. "This is the work we never write down," he says. "It's not medicine, but if you get it wrong, the whole herd sickens." Some fringe historians have written about night watch horse rituals, but mostly as curiosity. Few believe the Mongols truly thought dreams could make a horse ill. But then again, few have ever slept beside 50 breathing hearts on the open steppe under a sky so wide it feels like a mouth. By sunrise, nothing has attacked. Nothing has happened. But something has shifted. You feel it in the way the horses walk, in the way the wind returns. You ask if the danger has passed. He nods slowly. For now. But tomorrow we whisper thanks. Loud voices wake old things. You go to bed after dawn, head full of bones and bells and stories you'll never tell with a straight face. But in your dreams you hear hooves. Light ones. Moving beside you. Not chasing, just keeping watch. You sleep long into the morning wrapped in wool and the memory of midnight hooves. When you wake, the vet is already at work again. But today his hands move differently. Slower. More ceremonial. There's a hush across the camp that even the horses seem to honor. Today's lesson is stranger than the rest. More personal. And slightly awkward. Because today is about fertility rites and mare's milk magic. You find him near the riverbank pouring something white and frothy into a shallow bowl. The scent hits you first, sour, tangy, almost fizzy. Fermented mare's milk. You've tasted it before. It didn't go well. But today you're not drinking it. The vet is painting with it. Using a carved twig, he dips it into the milk and draws a spiral on the forehead of a broad-shouldered stallion, murmuring as he does. "This one has strong dreams," he says, "but weak seasons. You blink." Seasons. He nods. His blood doesn't turn in spring. You're not sure what that means, but you're learning not to interrupt. He completes the spiral, then dots the stallion's shoulders with small milk droplets. This is fertility work, not just physical, but energetic. In Mongol tradition, a stallion's power isn't measured only in how many foals he sires, but in how the herd responds to him. How the mares move around him, how he carries himself, how he feels in the wind. You're told some stallions can chill the herd if they carry too much cold in their bones, or block the flow of seasonal change. So the vet prepares what he calls warming rituals. He begins by combing the stallion's mane with a fine-toothed horn comb dipped in warm milk and wild thyme. The scent is earthy sharp and vaguely sweet. As he works, he hums a low rising melody that matches the rhythm of his hands. You watch the stallion's eyelids droop. The next step involves heat, not fire, but friction. He rubs dried cloths along the stallion's flanks in short, fast strokes. Not hard, just enough to raise warmth. It's almost like a massage. Then comes the application of charms. You're handed a pouch of small carved tokens, tiny horse heads, spirals, and a few more suggestive symbols. You raise an eyebrow. The vet smirks. The herd must laugh, even the charms. You help tie one to the stallion's tail. Another is buried beneath a pile of grass the mares will graze later. It's all about associative transfer. If the mares eat from the place touched by the charm, their receptivity increases. Or so the theory goes. He prepares a breeding salve from goat fat ginger root and a stone-ground powder of something you strongly suspect is deer antler. It's not applied where you think it might be, it's rubbed into the front knees. Strength begins in the front, he explains. The rest follows. Mainstream veterinary medicine rarely touches fertility beyond the mechanical or hormonal. But Mongol horse doctors took a whole-body approach scent season movement mood. There are even recorded beliefs that foals conceived under a waning moon were prone to weak lungs, while those sired after the first thunder of spring would grow bold and stubborn. Historians debate the origins of these ideas. Some trace them to shamanic traditions, others to practical breeding experience cloaked in mystical language. Whatever the source, the rituals continue in remote camps even today. But this isn't just about the stallions. You're soon led to the mare's circle, a ring of stones arranged near the river where 3 mares graze quietly. The vet places his hand on each of their bellies, eyes closed, then taps their flanks with a thin reed. Calling the water, he says. Then comes the milk chant. Yes, there's a chant. It's short, rhymed. You recognize a few words: river, sky, warm life. As he sings, you help pour warmed mare's milk into shallow bowls, placing one in front of each mare. They drink slow and steady, their ears flicking with calm. The idea, he explains, is to seed the belly with heat before conception. A cold womb brings cold foals, he says, and no one wants to ride a foal that never warms up. You believe him. Later that day, you help set up a wind blind, a temporary wall of tied cloths that creates a quiet space sheltered from the breeze. This is where mating will happen privately, gently, and with the air still. Mongols believe conception must occur in silence, or the foal may grow skittish. You ask if that's really true. He shrugs. Worked for my son. You laugh your first laugh in days. That evening, after the rituals are done, the vet pours the remaining mare's milk into the fire. The flames crackle, giving off a smell like scorched sugar and wool. For the ancestors, he says, so they remember how we continue. You sit beside him in the dim light, thinking of all the steps you've witnessed, all the gestures, all the weird, wonderful care. And suddenly, it doesn't seem strange that milk is a ritual that charms or jokes that hooves carry heat, or that the moon chooses what kind of foal will gallop into the world. Because here on the steppe, life isn't just born, it's courted. Sung into being. Warmed like milk before dawn. The next morning begins not with fire or hoofbeats, but the rhythmic clink of bells, soft bronze ones swaying gently from a sash at the vet's hip. You're not in the usual pasture, not even near the river bend. Near Shizajing. Today he's taking you higher into the hills to meet someone he calls the other doctor. You follow quietly. The horses are left behind except for a single gray mare loaded lightly with supplies. She walks without tether, as if she knows the path better than either of you. After an hour of silent climbing, you arrive at a wind-swept plateau, where colorful cloth streamers flap from a wooden pole. Beneath it sits an old man, eyes closed, breathing deep as if listening to the ground. He wears no saddlebag, no ointments, no bone hooks or jars of goat bile. Just layers of felt robes, a carved walking stick, and an amulet that pulses slightly in the light. This is what the shamans say. The vet kneels first. So do you. The old man opens his eyes, clear, unblinking, like they were waiting for yours. He says the vet begins without introduction, that a horse is a song with legs. You're about to ask what that means, but the shaman raises one finger. Wait. And so you wait. The wind picks up. A line of birds crosses the sky. The mare snorts once. Then the shaman begins to speak not loudly, but with the weight of someone used to being heard by silence itself. You think you treat a back, he says, but it is the tail that remembers. You cool a fever, but it is the ears that held the heat. You touch the belly, but it is the spirit who decides whether to digest. The vet nods. You're trying to follow, but it's like trying to read wind on a page. The shaman reaches into a pouch and pulls out a bundle of charred horsehair tied with red string. He crushes it between his palms and lets the ash fall into a bowl of still water. He holds it to the light. This mare, he says without looking at her, carries fear in the left shoulder. You blink. The vet merely nods again. The shaman waves the bowl gently, watching how the ash swirls. She dreams of cold teeth. You look at the mare. She's completely still. But now you're not sure what she's hiding under that calm. The vet steps forward and whispers something, just one word, in the mare's ear. She exhales slowly, and her head dips. She accepts, the shaman says. Then the ritual begins. The shaman traces 7 circles around the mare, slow, deliberate, each one a little wider than the last. With each pass, he drops a feather, a tuft of wool, a pebble, and finally a shard of bone into the grass. You ask what these represent. Wait, he says, so she does not float away when the pain leaves. You're beginning to understand shamanic healing is about release. Not just of illness, but of memory, of burdens carried in tendon skin and breath. He chants low, tuneless syllables that feel older than language. You don't recognize a single word, but somehow your chest feels less tight by the end. When it's done, he places a stone beneath the mare's hoof and tells her she may crush it when she's ready. She will know, he says. On the walk back, the vet explains not every illness is of the body. Sometimes the bones are healthy, he says, but the wind within is twisted. In traditional Mongol medicine, shamans weren't a last resort. They were part of the system. A horse with persistent lameness might be treated by 3 people, a vet for the joints, a herder for the diet, and a shaman for the dreams. Modern science doesn't include dreams in diagnosis, but steppe life never had the luxury of separating the real from the invisible. Fringe reports from Russian explorers in the 1800s describe shamans placing carved stones under sick horses, claiming they absorbed soul heat. Other tales speak of horses that refused to drink until the wind had been sung back into their ribs. You ask the vet if he believes all this. He looks at you sideways. I don't need to believe it, he says. I just know it works. That evening back at camp, the gray mare walks to the fire and gently steps on a rock with her left forehoof. It cracks beneath her weight. The vet doesn't smile. He just nods once and whispers. She remembers who she is now. And under the stars you lie awake wondering how many of your own ailments are simply forgotten songs, waiting for the right voice to sing them home. The next morning greets you with birdsong and dust. The air is warmer now, and the ground seems to exhale, as if the earth itself is waking up. You stretch, shake sleep from your bones, and follow the vet to the edge of camp, where a circle of stones has been cleared. Today, he says, you learn how the vets trained themselves. You expect a lecture, maybe some tools laid out in order, a step-by-step guide. What you get instead is a memory. I was 6 when my father gave me a blindfold, he begins. You blink. A blindfold. He nods, already tying one around your head. First lesson, you don't need eyes to know a horse. You're not sure you're ready for this, but he's already guiding you by the wrist to a waiting mare. He places your palm flat against her flank. Feel. Don't look. Is she calm? You nod, then stop. I think. You know, he says. Don't doubt. Doubt is the last thing a horse wants. You feel a twitch beneath your fingers. The mare shifts, but doesn't pull away. He leads your hands across her body, shoulder to withers to ribs. You feel warmth, subtle dips, a raised vein, the texture of hair roughened slightly by dust. Tell me where the wind is stuck. You hesitate. Then surprisingly, you do feel something. Just behind the front leg, a spot cooler than the rest. There you say. He grunts approval. Good, now listen. He presses your ear to her chest. You hear the rhythm slow, solid, but faint. Almost too faint. You learn this by doing, he says, over and over, until it sings to you. He removes the blindfold and hands you a smooth stone. Every time I got it wrong, he tells you my father gave me one of these. When I had a full pouch, I could call myself a student. You weigh the stone in your hand. It's light, but it carries weight. He tells you the second lesson came from pain. I once pulled a splinter from a hoof too fast. The horse kicked. I limped for a week. But I learned fast hands aren't wise hands. You follow him as he visits a herder's camp downwind. An old woman greets him warmly. She's a vet too, he says, trained by her uncle, who once treated Genghis Khan's own cavalry horses. Not that horse, she chuckles, but a descendant, maybe. She offers you tea that smells like smoked leather and wild honey. You drink while listening to her describe how she learned pressure points by walking barefoot beside grazing horses. If they shifted away, I knew the wind was blocked. If they leaned into me, the heat was rising. You realize now training wasn't just apprenticeship, it was immersion. Young vets lived with the herd, slept beside them, dreamed with them. It wasn't just a skill, it was a relationship. There's even a story the vet shares half joke, half truth about a boy who could find swelling in a hoof faster than his teacher by pretending to be a horse. He would crawl on all fours, shifting his weight until he felt where it hurt. He became famous. They called him the Hoof Whisperer. Historians argue over how Mongol vets passed on knowledge. Some say there were formal lineages, almost guild-like. Others insist it was word-of-mouth memory by firelight. But all agree it was generational. You didn't learn to be a vet from books. You inherited it like a name. That afternoon, you watch as the vet trains a younger boy, perhaps 10, how to read a horse's mood from its eye. The left eye tells truth, he says. The right eye shows what it wants you to believe. You chuckle. That works with people too. The boy laughs, but the vet doesn't. He adds, when a horse stops blinking, prepare for trouble. That's when the wind is holding its breath. Later, you help the boy apply a simple salve to a swollen hock. He hesitates, nearly drops the bowl. The vet doesn't scold. He simply says, every mistake you make, thank it. The boy frowns. It means you saw enough to try. Before the sun sets, you return to your own lessons. The blindfold again. The quiet. The vet asks you to identify 3 horses by touch alone, by shoulder slope, by tail, texture, by the pulse beneath their jaw. You get 2 right. He smiles. Not bad. You'll need 5 more stones. You laugh, but your fingers feel smarter than they did this morning. That evening, he pulls out a tattered scroll, more leather than parchment. It contains a map, not of land, but of a horse's energy lines, pathways of breath, wind, and heat that correspond to pressure points. You don't memorize this, he says. You feel it. like water in a riverbed. You sit beside him under a sky already blooming with stars. He tells you about a vet he once knew, a quiet man who barely spoke. One day his horse broke its leg on a slope. No hope of saving it. The man laid beside the horse whispered to it until it passed. Then for 3 days he walked alone through the mountains. When he returned, he was changed. He never carried tools again, just his hands. People came from miles around. His touch, they said, could remind a horse of who it was. Did you believe that you ask? The vet shrugs. I rode one of his patients. It never stumbled, not once. You fall asleep with your fingers curled around the smooth stone he gave you. And in your dream, you're walking through grass barefoot, following the breath of a horse who seems to know exactly where you're going. You wake to a stillness that feels off. Not the peaceful kind, but a waiting kind. The kind of stillness that comes before something wants to move. The horses are clustered tight this morning, their heads lowered, tails twitching in unison. It's not fear. It's tension. The vet greets you with a nod, but today his focus is laser sharp. No work on wounds today, he says. We talk about what moves through the body. Today's lesson, a Mongol theory of circulation. You expect blood and vessels, maybe a chart. Instead, he begins with movement. Walk, he says. You walk. Now breathe with your left foot. You stop. What? He gestures again. Breathe with your foot. As it moves. You try. You focus your breath on your step, syncing the rhythm of inhale with stride. It feels silly at first, but then something clicks. Your chest feels less stiff. He nods. Now you begin to understand. You sit beside the vet as he traces a line along the back of a gelding's neck, following it down the shoulder across the flank and to the fetlock. This is one of the 5 winds, he says. It rides the blood, but is not blood. To Mongol horse doctors, wind wasn't just energy. It was a carrier of heat, of pain, of emotion. Circulation wasn't a closed-loop system, it was a tide. And if that tide flowed the wrong direction, illness crept in. He points to another gelding, this one fidgeting even at rest. His wind is reversed. How can you tell? He lifts the tail gently and shows you the skin is clammy. A faint tremble. A dark vein running too close to the surface. His breath doesn't match his feet, he says. Again, you're not sure what that means. So he shows you. He ties a strip of cloth just above the fetlock, not tight, just enough to feel. Then he presses a thumb behind the ear and waits. Within seconds, the horse lets out a long sigh and stops fidgeting. You interrupted the loop, the vet says, and the wind agreed. There are written records from Chinese emissaries that reference this belief, that Mongol healers used points of pause to redirect inner motion. Some called them breach points, and their mapping was kept secret within families. No 2 vets used exactly the same ones. You ask how they knew where to press. He replies, you listen with your fingers. Then he tells you the legend of the 3 roads. Every horse has 3 roads inside, he says. One for strength, one for breath, one for memory. The first runs from chest to hoof. The second from nose to belly. The third from the ears to the tail. Block any road, he explains, and the others carry the weight. For a while. You ask how to know which is blocked. He shrugs. Depends on what breaks first. He shows you how to check pulse, not at the leg, but under the tongue. The mare you examine has a pulse that's rapid, almost panicked. Too much fire, he mutters. We cool her breath. So you fetch water, but not cold. Warm. He mixes it with fennel sprigs of bitter root and a dash of salt. Cold water traps the fire inside, he says. Warm water invites it out. The mare drinks. Her ears relax. Later, he teaches you a breath massage not on the lungs, but the back. You press flat palms along the horse's ribs in a circular motion, syncing with each exhale. It's meditative. The horse responds slowly like a drum settling after a long song. Now he says her breath and her blood are walking together again. You sit under the shade of the elder tree as he tells you about his first patient, a chestnut colt, with a limp that worsened with each season. Everyone said it was the hoof, he recalls. But I listened to his steps. The rhythm was off. He found the source in the neck. A tension that pulled the spine just enough to make the gait falter. I didn't treat the leg, he says. I treated the memory of injury. You ask if it worked. He smiles. I rode him for 6 winters. As the day winds down, you're asked to prepare a circle of breath, a walking space for a nervous mare, laid out with stones, herbs, and scented ash. The mare walks it 7 times each round slower than the last. This is how Mongol vets treated emotional trauma, not with isolation, but ritualized movement. You learn that sometimes a horse isn't cured by standing still. It must walk its own circulation back into rhythm. Modern science echoes this now. Studies in equine therapy show how movement heals trauma, how breath and step must sync. But the vet, he just smiles when you mention that. We've known this, he says, since before maps had ink. You fall asleep that night tracing invisible lines across your own body, wondering which of your roads has been blocked and which wind inside you needs to be heard. The vet is in a good mood this morning. You can tell by the way he hums to himself. While tying his sash by the extra scoop of mare's milk he adds to your bowl, and most of all by the mischief in his eyes. Today, he says, we treat a foreigner. You blink. A horse. No, he grins. A Persian. And just like that, you're off toward a caravan camp on the far edge of the valley. The trail winds past low hills, a scattering of blue wildflowers, and the remnants of an old wooden post carved with foreign script. When you arrive, the Persian ambassador is waiting in silks and gold, fanning himself with a painted cloth, and looking mildly uncomfortable. His horse, on the other hand, looks worse. It's a tall Arabian stallion, lean and beautiful, but clearly distressed. Its flanks heave slightly, its ears lay back, and its tail flicks in agitation. He says the horse is cursed, the vet tells you deadpan. You glance at the ambassador, who is nodding seriously. Today's lesson is one of contrast: foreign guests, foreign ailments, and the unexpected consequences of cross-cultural medicine. The vet doesn't scoff. He doesn't roll his eyes. Instead, he nods politely and begins his work. He moves slowly, methodically, starting with scent. The Persian's servants wrinkle their noses as the vet sniffs the stallion's flank belly, even the space beneath the tail. Then he steps back, squints at the sky, and says, "He's not cursed, he's confused." You suppress a chuckle. He explains the stallion was likely given herbs in the desert, warming ones spicy to the blood. But here on the cool grasslands, they've overworked his system. He has too much foreign fire, the vet says. It's boiling in the wrong climate. You ask what the plan is. Cool the fire, he says, but respectfully. He begins with a compressed goat's milk and powdered river stone, mixed into a paste and wrapped in wet grass. He applies it behind the ears and along the chest. The Persian watches, clearly bewildered. The vet offers him a sliver of the river stone to hold. For translation, he says with a wink. As he works, he instructs you to fetch 2 small bones, clean light and carved on one side. These are placed gently under the saddle pad. Bones of stillness, he explains. So the saddle does not argue with the wind. Then comes the controversial part. The vet gently pinches the skin just behind the stallion's front knee and lets out a long, trilling whistle. The horse flinches, then settles. He repeats the whistle higher this time and taps the hooves with a soft reed. To wake the breath, he says, but not too fast. You never startle a foreign wind. The ambassador, watching this entire performance with furrowed brows, finally speaks. "Will this work?" The vet translates your question into a smile. Only if the horse listens. The stallion snorts once as if in reply. Mainstream records tell us that Mongol horse doctors were often called upon to treat animals from visiting emissaries, Persians, Chinese, even Venetians. Sometimes they succeeded with methods that baffled foreign riders. Other times, well, things got awkward. You ask if he's ever had a foreigner refuse treatment. "Oh yes," he says. "A merchant from Samarkand once demanded I wash a horse's hooves in rosewater." You raise your eyebrows. "I did," he says. "Then I made him drink the rest." You're not sure if he's joking. The Persian stallion walks easier now. Not perfect, but his breathing has slowed, and his tail flicks less. The ambassador offers the vet a coin. The vet refuses. "Let the horse remember us kindly," he says. "That's enough." Later, he tells you a deeper truth. When we treat a foreign horse, we treat its history. It's not just sick, it's disoriented. You cannot cure confusion with needles. He pauses. And sometimes a horse is only sick because it misses a different wind. That night, as you sit by the fire, the vet pulls out a pouch of trinket souvenirs from horses he's treated across borders. A Turkish tassel, a shard of silk, a bronze bell. Every one of these, he says, was given back to me by the horse, not the rider. You stare at him. "I'm serious," he insists. One dropped a tassel at my feet after 2 days of fever. Another refused to move until I hung this bell on its harness. He smiles at your disbelief. Animals don't lie. They just remember. As the stars come out, the horses settle, and a soft wind picks up from the east. You realize something. The world is vast, and Mongol horse doctors weren't just treating animals. They were translating between lives, languages, and landscapes, one hoofprint at a time. The storm arrives in the early morning, not with rain, but with memory. The vet's pacing before the sun even shows. Not anxious, intent. You wake groggily, still tasting the dust from yesterday's ride. But he's already rummaging through his saddlebag, pulling out old scrolls and knotting his belt tighter than usual. Today, he says, you'll see what happened to all this. All this. He gestures around you, the horses, the smoke-smudged wind charms the circle of flattened grass where you practiced hoof wraps last night. What happens when people stop listening? Today's lesson is unsettling the science that followed. The herd is calm, but the vet leads you past them, past the outer gears, to a storage tent you didn't know existed. Inside is a chest made of dark wood bound with cracked leather. He opens it slowly, reverently, like it contains a sleeping god. Inside, scraps of old veterinary manuscripts, worn, bone-handled tools, brittle pages that crumble at the edges. Each artifact whispers of something once alive. He pulls one parchment into the light. A drawing of a horse, stylized but detailed with lines across the body, like tributaries on a map. This is what they kept, he says. The ones who came after. You listen as he explains. After the Mongol Empire fractured, some horse doctors tried to record what they knew, turning wind and spirit into charts. Breath became internal airflow. Bones became locomotor segments. The language changed. And when the language changed, he says, so did the listening. European and Chinese scholars began cataloging Mongol horse knowledge in pieces, hoof care here, feeding strategies there. But the soul of the system, the integration of body, wind, and world was too fluid to translate. So what survived? Pressure point charts, hoof trimming methods, milk-fed recovery diets, a few salves and herbal formulas, particularly the ones easy to replicate with known ingredients. But what was lost? Everything that didn't fit in a box. He shows you a diagram labeled in Manchu script, a flow chart tracing energy from the tail to the ears, too mystical for science, too detailed to be myth. This one made it into a Qing-era veterinary codex, he says, but they called it symbolic only. You study the drawing. It's not symbolic. It's intuitive. Then he opens a leather pouch filled with letters, notes from his grandfather written to other horse doctors across Mongolia and western China. Cursive, rambling, warm. They speak not of dosages, but of seasons, of how hooves cracked differently in the summer of 1904, how a foal born under red moonlight refused to nurse until it was sung to. This is oral memory caught on paper, and few have read it. You ask if anyone has tried to gather this knowledge again. He nods, a few. But they face a problem modern medicine likes clean lines. Mongol horse medicine. It's a tangle of thread and intuition woven from soil and dreams. Still echoes remain. He tells you about a Kyrgyz veterinarian who rediscovered a Mongol technique for using heat stones on the flanks to treat early colic. A Kazakh herder who mapped wind stagnation to a muscular cramping pattern, now understood as electrolyte imbalance. Science is catching up, but slowly and awkwardly, because science wants to own the truth. The old ways, they just want to share it. That afternoon, you help rebind a torn copy of a 15th century herbal chart, complete with hand-painted images of plants labeled with poetic names like songleaf, sweatroot, and whispergrass. These weren't just medicines, the vet says. They were companions, named like friends, remembered like cousins. Even now, he won't treat a horse with bitter root unless it's been sung to first. You find a short passage in a crumbling booklet that stops you cold. If the hoof splits in silence, it is not the hoof that needs mending. It is the silence. He looks over your shoulder, smiles faintly. That was my great-grandmother. You sit in the tent until the light fades, until the wind picks up the edge of a page and turns it for you. Outside, the horses are restless. Not sick, just unsettled, like they sense the conversation. As you roll up the scrolls, the vet says, the world got faster. But horses didn't. You nod. Then gently he places a small jar into your hands, an oil mix of pine sap and mare's milk. Keep this, he says. Not because you'll use it, but so it won't be forgotten. That night you sit alone near the fire, the jar warming in your palm, the scrolls safe in your pack. And you wonder when knowledge turns to dust, who listens to what the dust remembers. You rise before dawn, not because you're cold, not because of hoofbeats, because you know it's the last morning. The fire is already lit. The vet sits beside it, sharpening a twig. Not a knife, just a twig. You sit across from him without speaking because silence says more now than words ever could. He finally speaks. Today we find what's left. You think he means the end of your journey, but he means something else. Today's lesson is the final one, what modern vets still don't know. You spend the morning walking through the herd, not to treat anyone, not to diagnose, just to listen. You run your hand along their backs, feel their breath on your palms, let their warmth settle in your bones. The vet does the same, though, with a different kind of touch. His fingers ask questions, and somehow the horses answer. He stops beside an old mare graying around the muzzle, slow in her movements but alert. He crouches and places both hands gently on her ribs. She always knew before I did, he says, which colt would live, which wouldn't. You ask how. She listens differently, he replies. I've tried, for years. I still can't hear what she hears. This is the secret the books never mention. That Mongol horse doctors didn't believe they knew everything. They believed there was always something left to learn from the wind, from the hooves, from the breath under a horse's tongue. You walk together to the far side of camp where a new foal lies curled beside its mother. Not sick, not injured, but tense. The vet squats and just sits. No tools, no smoke, no chanting. Watch, he whispers. You do. The foal breathes fast, at first legs twitching, but then slowly it begins to match the mother's breath. You blink. It's almost imperceptible. That's something no medicine does, the vet says, but it saves more lives than any root. You spend the afternoon writing down everything you can remember. Pressure points, herbs, charms, breath rhythms, hoof cracks. But it feels like trying to bottle wind. What if I forget something, you ask? He shrugs. Then forget it. The horse will remind you. He tells you of a healer in the north who swore his hands changed temperature depending on what a horse needed. Warm for muscle ache. Cold for fever. No one believed him until 3 colts in a row calmed the moment he touched them. There's science there, the vet says, but not the kind you measure. He leads you to a hilltop where a stone stands marked with carved horse hooves and lines of old Mongolian script. A memorial. This was the last of the dream doctors, he says. You trace the carvings. She treated horses with words, he says. No herbs, no ointments, just stories. The stories put the wind back where it belonged. You ask if it worked. Ask the horses, he says. Later that evening, he hands you a final gift, a cord wrapped in red cloth. Inside, a smooth pebble, a braid of tail hair, and a whistle carved from sheep bone. This isn't for calling horses, he tells you. It's for remembering the sound of their breath. And then as the sun sinks low, the two of you sit one last time among the herd. A colt noses your arm. A mare leans her flank against you. The vet is silent. You ask him what he thinks the future of horse medicine looks like. He chuckles. Louder, faster, probably more wires. Then he looks at you. But as long as someone listens to breath and watches the wind, there's hope. You fall asleep beneath the stars, hand resting against the whistle, feeling the warm draft of a horse's exhale, brushing your cheek. Not as a farewell, as a reminder. Let's slow everything down now. Let the step fade behind your eyes. There's no need to remember every herb, every hoof, or every whispered word. Just let the images drift by warm horses, under golden skies, bone charms clinking softly, smoke curling upward as stories are murmured into fur and wind. Let your breath settle like dust over calm grass. Inhale gently. Imagine the cool dawn air of the Mongolian plain. Exhale slowly, like the steady sigh of a horse lying down after a long day. There's no rush now. Nothing to diagnose, nothing to treat. The vet is still there in your mind, humming by the fire, a whistle around his neck, a stone in his palm. The herd shifts in the distance, not afraid, not sick, just alive, present, and still. You did not come here to become a vet. You came to remember that knowledge doesn't always wear a name tag or carry a chart. Sometimes it lives in the warmth of a nose against your arm, in the hush between hoofbeats, in the rhythm of shared breath. So stay here a little longer. Let the horses keep you company. Let the wind pass over you without hurry. The earth is still turning, but you don't need to follow it for now. Just breathe and drift. You're safe. You're whole. You're home.